Thank you. All right, so welcome to Q3 SkateSafe for Leadership webinar. My name is Shelby Meyer. I'm the director of US Figure Skating SkateSafe program. Here with me tonight, I have some guests that are joining to talk about conflict resolution with all of us. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So first we have Tim Hazen, who is our legal counsel.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who haven't met me yet, Tim Hazen, now legal counsel. So a lot of what I do is conflict resolution. And yeah, we're here to support all of you at the local level.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And we also have Julie Parks, who's a member of the SkateSafe team.
Hi, everybody. I'm usually speaking a lot more during these, but I'm going to sit back and let some other folks take the reins tonight. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I'll definitely be passing them along. But otherwise, I'm here just like all of you to enjoy the wisdom.
Yeah, Julie is the friendly face behind the SkateSafe inbox right now. So if you've had any compliance questions, she's been the one to answer you. And then we have with us everyone's favorite volunteer, Alan Wolf.
Thanks, Shelby. So I'm currently the Vice Chair of Rules and Policy. I was the Safe Sport or SkateSafe Chair of US Figure Skating a couple of years back, and I've been working on club conflict resolution for about a dozen years. So this is a topic that I've been doing for a long time. So I'm an attorney. I know Susie's on the line, so I always say when Susie gives me time, so I guess I should say when Susie and Shelby give me time, I also practice law, so that's my background.
On the side when you're not volunteering for us. Okay, so tonight, as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about conflict resolution. I'm sure a lot of you have likely been in Alan's conflict resolution conversations at any club leadership meetings or any other webinars that we've hosted, but we're going to try to switch things up a little bit. So I'm kind of going to take the reins here to start, but we do have some scenarios at the end that we're going to jump through that hopefully Alan and Tim can really provide some helpful guidance for all of us on just real life situations that we've all kind of been dealing with within US figure skating. So with that, we're just going to jump through what is conflict resolution, why it's important, what makes a good person to handle the conflict resolution process. Some common cognitive errors just to be cognizant of as you're working through that process, and then just good skills of managing a conflict resolution. And then again, our scenarios. And we should probably have a ticker going for how many times I'm going to say conflict resolution. It's going to be up there. So what is conflict resolution? I took this quote from True Sport just as a quick definition, but it's essentially a disagreement that has emotion connected to it. It's not specific to sport. It's not specific to US figure skating or your club. Conflict is natural in all areas of our life. I'm sure we can all attest to that. But when we're looking at healthy conflict resolution processes, what we're going to talk about today is just, how to manage that process in a way that's meaningful for all of the parties that are involved. And your conflict resolution skills that you're using to facilitate these discussions are really going to help to increase the understanding and control of these emotional responses that the individuals involved could have. So I did just link on the bottom here, and we'll send out this deck to everybody who we sent the invitation to for this webinar along with the recording. But this link I thought had some really interesting information on why conflict resolution is so important, but I didn't want to bore you with all of that stuff. So I also have another link here just for US figure skating sample conflict resolution policy. This can be found in members only. If you have a conflict resolution policy within your club already, I would encourage you to still take a look at this one and just see if there's anything missing that you could kind of beef up your own with, just to make sure that you have something solid to fall back on if for whatever reason you do need to utilize it. So with that, again, why is it important? Conflict resolution can really help you to build strong relationships in your clubs. So if you have a situation that leads to conflict between, let's say, two members of your organization, if you let that kind of go and fester, it could permeate through different areas of your organization that just isn't really productive or helpful. It can also help to enhance that commitment of, being a team and working through these issues together. A lot of times when you think of conflict resolution, you're thinking of the two sides that are involved. But what we want to do is shift that focus to make sure that everybody's really focusing on, how can we work together as a team to make sure that everybody has that safe, supportive, and healthy skating environment. So This graphic here that I included, I just thought it was a really good way to just kind of flow through what that process could look like. If you're the person who is managing a conflict at your club or your program, it's really important for you to understand what the issue is. You might get a report in writing at your club that just outlines what that conflict is, but it's important for you to dive deeper into the specifics of why the problem is happening in the first place. So there could be some history there, maybe 10, 15, 20 years of history between two parties that have led to just this explosion of a conflict, if you will. But then you can really assess the situation from all angles. So once you have all of that information from the parties that are involved, and maybe some outsiders as well, it can help you to make an informed decision on what the most appropriate next step is going to be. And then one-on-one conversations. We do this at US Figure Skating too, and we get reports of misconduct within the sport too. It's important for us to make sure that everybody feels heard throughout the process. So even if you receive a very thorough report where you don't think that you need any additional information, it's still important for you to give that person the time of day just to talk through what their specific concerns are, who the parties involved are, what led to that specific issue even happening in the first place, and then of course, what their desired outcome is. So when we talk about establishing, what that common goal looks like for the parties that are involved, my perspective on that is to give them ideas. Don't let them just come up with something on their own, because what we don't want to do is set false expectations for what the outcome could potentially be. So an example of that could be if you are, let's say, working through a conflict at your club and you say, I hear you, I understand that you're having a lot of issues. Here are 3 potential outcomes that I think that we could reach as a team. Give them options again on what that looks like for all of you. And then lastly, just devising solutions. So that kind of plays into establishing those goals. Alan, anything that you want to add so far? You're being awful quiet. Nothing? Got it. So common cognitive errors when we're talking about conflict resolution. So these could come from any of the parties that are involved. They could come from us as the person who's resolving the conflict, or they could come from the parties who are maybe reporting the conflict or responding to the conflict. So the first one is self-serving fairness interpretations. It's not really fair for me to go into a situation and tell you exactly what the outcome needs to be before I give you a chance to really investigate what is actually happening in the first place. So I obviously have a very biased point of view if I'm the reporting party in that situation. Another could be escalation. So this could happen for a number of reasons. A person may feel that they're not being heard. They might feel that the process isn't fair. They might feel that they're not getting the desired outcome that they want, which can happen quite often. So if you have a person who comes into this process with maybe unrealistic expectations, they could potentially escalate, right? So again, it's important to level set what that looks like from the get-go to make sure that they understand what the potential outcomes could be. If they're telling you that they off the bat want the other party to be banned from the facility or from the club or from US Figure Skating, you might not think that the misconduct that was reported could rise to that level of a sanction. But again, level setting what that looks like to make sure that if that is what they want, it's not something that's, going to happen, and they're aware of that upfront. And then overconfidence. So being overly confident can kind of harm the entire process. So when you're thinking through, how you want to work through a conflict resolution, you're thinking of the different parties that you have involved. Maybe you have some pre-existing relationships with some of the parties or one of the parties to where you feel confident that what that person told you is true and you accept it at face value without doing any kind of investigation. That's not really fair to the other parties that are involved, to where you could have somebody who feels that they're not being heard, or that they're not getting a fair chance at a conflict resolution because of, again, the pre-existing relationships that might occur. And then blaming. It's not helpful to blame. So a tip that you could utilize is encouraging all of your parties to utilize I statements when they're talking through their side of the situation in your one-on-one meetings. So tell them to, talk about what they felt, what they experienced, and not what somebody else did. And that can really help you get to the root of what they're feeling, the emotions that are attached to all of it, and then what their desired outcome would be. So, skills of a good conflict resolution manager. This can be really tricky, especially when you're looking at conflict resolution at the local level, because there are always going to be some pre-existing relationships that you have to navigate while you're working through the process. So, managing your own stress is probably the first and foremost important one, I think, while you remain calm and alert throughout the entire process. Being able to come into a high stress situation very level headed is going to level set the expectation for how everyone's going to behave in these conversations. So you also want to pay attention to the feelings that are being expressed by everybody in the room. So you can learn a lot from nonverbals. So it can be really helpful to have these meetings face to face rather than over the phone. Understand that sometimes over the phone is just what has to happen, but you can see a lot with somebody's facial expressions, their arm motions, the way they might be fidgeting in their seat. And there could be some nonverbals that lead you to probe a little bit deeper into some of the specific things that they might be telling you. And then be aware of and respect everyone's differences. We don't all have to get along. We don't all have to like each other, but we do have to all be respectful towards each other. And being able to come into a situation where, again, you might have a conflict where people just flat out say, I don't like that person. And you being able to come in and respect those differences, whether it be cultural, personal, a personality difference, a skating style difference, a coaching style difference, being able to look through that and just see the people for humans, if you will, is going to be really helpful while you're making sure that everybody feels like they have the floor to be able to share their experiences. And then control your own emotions and behaviors. It's really easy to fly on the coattails of somebody else's emotion. So if you're having a situation where you're bringing two parties together to hopefully help to resolve a conflict, it could be a really high stress situation where people might be yelling, they might be saying inappropriate things to each other or unprofessional things to each other. And you have to be the one that's even keeled to hopefully bring everybody back down to that level. Without doing that, I mean, you're just kind of setting yourself up for a chaotic situation that's only going to worsen as you move forward. So again, just making sure that you set those expectations early. Maybe it's a one-sheeter that your club or program has for, hey, we're working through a conflict. Here's everything that I expect of you. I expect you to show empathy. I expect you to show respect, use I statements, avoid blaming, and just make sure that everyone's following those for any conversation that you have about the conflict. So with that, I just breezed through that super quickly. So Alan, is there anything else about just conflict resolution in general that you want to add before we dive into these scenarios?
A few things, Shelby, that you brought up that are very important. One of them, if you're part of the problem, you're not going to be part of the solution. So if you're trying to resolve a conflict and the conflict involves you or your coach or your child or a family member, you want to step back. You're not the best person at that point to be trying to solve it. Another piece that I've learned over the years, just in my profession, and Shelby was just touching on it, is let folks talk. A lot of times, a lot of these problems and a lot of the conflicts can be solved just by letting somebody say what's on their mind. Sitting here, I remember one time I was driving from Maine to Boston, Massachusetts for a flight, and I called a member, and she had a lot of issues with the club, and she literally talked to me for the 2 hours I was driving, and that's all she really wanted to do. She wanted to get her point across. She wanted to express it. I didn't interrupt, and she felt satisfied by the end of the conversation. And frankly, I had done really nothing other than listen. So that a real key piece is when you're involved in the resolution, do a lot of the listening. Sometimes that's all it will take. And one of the other topics that Shelby had was escalation. And the other part of that is make sure, as the person trying to resolve the conflict, that you're not escalating the process, that you're not escalating the problem. We had a situation some years back of locker room issues. And the club decided to interview every single skater that was in the locker room and talk to all of them. And then they all went home and talked to their parents. And everybody started pointing fingers at everyone else. And in that situation, because of all, I'll call it bullying or finger pointing, one of the skaters threatened to commit suicide. So again, that was a situation where somebody was doing their best to investigate, but they escalated by involving way too many people. So just sit back, be calm, look at the whole situation, get all of the facts, let people talk, and move forward from there. Lots of the things that we'll talk about tonight are solving conflicts before you even have them. What I've done over the years with Susie in the membership department is try to resolve things before they get to Shelby and Tim and Julie. We want the conflicts to be resolved right at the club level, which is part of the reason for this tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a huge part of the reason that we are talking about conflict resolution for tonight's webinar. We oftentimes receive reports at headquarters where we would love to assist with the resolution, but it's not nearly as meaningful as a resolution at the local level where you're able to have those one-on-one conversations in person to really dive into what the situation looks like. We would, again, love to be able to handle that, but you all are more than capable of assisting with those situations. And we just want to make sure that you have the tools that you need to be able to do that effectively. And to Alan's point about talking to minors about a situation, you should never be talking to a minor about an investigation, a conflict that you're trying to resolve without the presence or permission of their parent. You always want to make sure that that parent's going to be involved there. We've had situations where clubs have tried to resolve conflict by approaching minors directly, and then the parents come to us and say, what the heck, why are they talking to my kid without my permission? I don't want my child to be involved in this. And rightfully so, right? Like, as the parent, that's their choice of if they want their child to be involved. So always involve the parent first before you start to talk to the minors. And Tim, I saw that you came off mute. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add on that, part of this mission of empowering clubs to be able to handle conflict resolution, that person that, handles the resolution and conflict at the local level, you can still be friendly with people. And it doesn't mean that, you have to be so serious all the time and straightforward, but, it's just setting those boundaries and being respectful to everyone. And, when a decision needs to be made, having the process to handle it and being confident in the process to handle it. And also, conflict is everywhere, but people just have bad days sometimes too, and it might not be their best character. And, then again, like Alan was saying, you can just talk a lot of these things out and just have that human connection with people and really just break it down to, we're both human. We going through a lot and had a bad day and, be better moving forward. But you really just need to buy into that. And that's what having a good conflict resolution process is all about.
Definitely.
In this slide, Shelby said, be aware of and respect differences. I've been on calls before, and in my mind, it's my opinion that the person is being unreasonable. They're coming up with positions that just don't make any sense at all. I don't interrupt. I don't jump in. I let them say what they want to say. It's important not to take sides when you're trying to resolve the conflict. As you said, work together to come up with a solution. If you take sides, all it's going to do is make it worse.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think even further to that, I mean, we're not walking in that person's shoes who brought the conflict to your attention. So we don't know exactly what their experience was, to where it's not our place to pass judgment on whether or not this conflict is worthy of our time. If it's being brought to our attention, then it needs to be addressed one way or another. And maybe that's a conversation with the individual to empower them to, have conversations that might be difficult or uncomfortable, or maybe it's you assisting with those conversations. But even further to that, I think it's important too to know what your limits are. You all are experts in a lot of things, and we're just adding another thing to your plate, right? But I just want you to know that, of course, we're always here to lean on if you have a situation where you're like, dang, I really don't know what the most appropriate next step is, or I just have way too many conflicts of interest in this resolution process to where I don't think that I can make a fair judgment. You're certainly welcome to lean on us in those situations where you just don't know which way to turn for next steps. All right, so with that, let's get to the fun part. I have some scenarios. I'm just going to toss these at Tim and Alan, and then we are just going to run through them, quiz them with questions. If you have any specific questions about these scenarios, or you want to throw in a what if, you're welcome to unmute yourself or add anything to the chat box. So for scenario number 1, we have a 12-year-old skater at your rink who has been working with the same coach for years. The skater's parents want to pursue other coaching options to advance their child's skating abilities. The skater's current coach makes unprofessional comments to the parents and skater that make them feel uncomfortable about continuing to pursue those other coaching opportunities. So maybe that coach is saying things like, well, you're really dumb for leaving me. Your kid's not going to get any medals without me. You clearly don't know what's best for your child. So let's just say that those are the types of things that this coach is saying. So Alan, Tim, what do we think?
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, with this one, and especially if the parent isn't familiar with skating, say it's their kid's first season as a skater, and this coach is really just making them feel uncomfortable. You know, the first thing that they should do is just try to have a conversation with them. And, you know, just express those boundaries that they don't feel comfortable with this coach, and they do want to like explore other people. And every parent has, you know, that ability to use a coach that they want, and they can leave a coach if they feel that that coach doesn't have the best interest of their child, just like a coach can also leave a student if they don't, you know, see a long-term goal. So it's really ways. If that doesn't resolve it, then, you know, going to the club president, the club board, and just talking to them about it. They would have the experience of these coach relationships that are really specific to the sport of figure skating. And they'll be able to provide guidance there.
So Alan, I have a question for you.
Sure.
When we think through like a coaching code of conduct that a club or a program might have, would that cover this type of unprofessional behavior?
It should, Shelby. You know, and it goes back to what Tim said a little while ago. Maybe the coach was having a bad day. Maybe the coach was misunderstood. I mean, there's many ways to look at this. I agree with, you know, what Tim said. You could also, if the skaters' parents are coming to you to resolve the conflict, hear them out, hear the story, then talk to the coach. And the coach may say, look, it was really dumb on my part. I apologize. This is the first time I've ever lost a skater, and I didn't do it properly. Because you don't know the whole story. So it goes back to a couple slides ago, get all of the facts. If that is the case, as the person helping to resolve it, you tell the coach you should go apologize to the parents. The parents are the consumer. They can choose, as Tim said, whoever they want to coach. If the coach meant it, if the coach said these things, then Shelby's right. There's a coach conduct. They might have to go up in front of the board to see what the response should be, and how to work with this coach so that they work through this issue that they have. It's never fun. My daughter was a skater. I had to change coaches. I actually remember, and we were a couple hours away, so it wasn't face to face. I remember sitting in a car trying to dial the number to come up to call that coach, because I didn't want to fire the coach. I liked the coach, but it was not the best thing. So on the other end, being on the receiving end, in that situation, the coach was totally professional. But it may be a young coach or a new coach or a coach that's never had it happen before. So get all the information and then educate. This does happen. This isn't let's make up a story and make up a scenario. The worst one I ever heard, a parent, excuse me, fired a coach, and the coach went into the locker room and said, all of my skaters, and this was before Safe Sport, all of my skaters, you tell your parents, I'll kill you if you ever fire me. True story. And the coach needed to be spoken to. The coach was visibly upset, apologized, and everybody moved on. So again, it goes back to get all the information, get all the facts, and see if you can resolve it quickly at the local level.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, because there's confrontation there, right? And I think confrontation makes people uncomfortable, to your point, Alan, of wanting to call that coach to essentially fire them, but it's not a fun conversation to have. Has there ever been a situation, to your knowledge, Alan, where clubs have utilized like a mentorship type of situation for younger coaches who are just kind of learning the ropes?
There have. I've seen it in many situations where, if we call it junior coaches, coaches learning, coaches that are new, where clubs have had them work with somebody before they work with skaters on their own and taught them. Reading through this, Shelby, when I first saw it, my first thought is to talk to Heidi, who's working on the coach's curriculum, and say, Heidi, this is really a great topic on hiring and firing, and what should coaches do? I know a lot of coaches that I've talked to in the past, if somebody else comes to them and says, I no longer want to work with Tim, I want to work with Shelby. And Shelby calls up Tim and says, Tim, I got this phone call. Are they paid to date? Do they owe you any money? And I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be giving them a lesson. So, I don't know how Heidi will start presenting this in terms of education, but I think it's a great topic and something that younger coaches and veterans, should have a refresher on.
Definitely. So Heidi has a lot of really cool ideas about the coaching curriculum and then just the continuing education from there. So we are partnering with her on quite a bit of what that looks like for professionalism issues, things that don't quite rise to the level of being like a SkateSafe or a safe sport violation, but it's still not behavior that should be tolerated, right? So we are working on a coach's code of conduct that's specific to a lot of these professionalism issues that we might be getting reports about, just so that there is some recourse to make sure that we're holding them accountable, but also educating them on what those specific needs are there. Awesome. Anything else that you wanted to add for this specific situation?
One last thing, and just to build off what Alan was saying, if you're in this situation where the parent brings these facts to you, it's no conflict is the same. So being able to come up with creative solutions to the problem, like the mentorship thing, if you see that this is a young coach that is acting this way, and then having the conversation with them, you find out that's the way that their coaches were with them when they were skating in such a situation. Having a strong coach that can mentor them and just teach them the ropes is invaluable. And it's creative solutions like that really just it creates a win-win for both parties, and that's the ideal situation, obviously.
Everyone loves a good win-win for sure. And speaking
And
of
Shelby, Alex Chang just came up with it.
Yes, I was just going to read his comment here. So Alex, thank you for that. So Alex is saying that you can also go to rink management if the coach is an employee of that facility, because there should be some kind of employee expectation of the coach's conduct that includes private lesson business. So normally rink management would help customers navigate that. So that's a really great tip too. to where, you know, if it is a situation where you have a rink manager such as Alex Chang, who's fabulous, where you can lean on them for help with situations like this, I'm sure that they wouldn't necessarily want to jump to disciplining automatically, right? It's more so educating first and making sure that that person understands what those expectations are, and notifying rink management and having them be a part of that conversation can really help to hit that home. But one last thing on this one, I think, you know, when we're talking again about conflict resolution, issues with confrontation, what we don't want to do is just let this fester. So if this parent and this skater gets to a point where they're like, it's more uncomfortable for us to leave than to stay, then that's where we're creating bigger issues. So what we don't want to do is just let this go unaddressed, because it could just get worse. Conflicts could arise later down the road. Things will just fester and not be fun for anybody involved. All right, next one. Okay, so we have Justin and Kyle. They're both 16 years old. They recently had a collision on the ice that fortunately did not result in injury. Justin accused Kyle of skating aggressively, and tension arose between the involved parties. Justin's parents feel Kyle's coach is encouraging unsafe and aggressive skating techniques as a means of intimidation. They share their concerns with other parents, which leads to conflict between multiple club members who have picked a side. So this is one that we've heard a lot in our office. So Alan, Tim, who wants to start?
Tim, you want to say what you've done on these in the past?
Yeah. So this scenario gets brought to you at a club level. You know, the first step should be fact gathering, and, you know, part of those, you know, facts that you can gather and the tools in your toolkit could be like a live burn situation where you can reference, you know, you can go pull the tape and check out the actual collision. And then there, you really just see the intent of the parties, what happened after the collision. You know, how did the parties, what were their verbal actions towards each other? And then from there, you know, just talk to the parties again, see what happened, why they are upset, and, you know, just figure out if there's deeper issues, or if it is, you know, just hitting each other on ice and colliding and they don't like each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, accidents do happen to where people might run into each other on the ice, and that's not necessarily misconduct, right? But I think when we're looking at, you know, the intent behind it, like Tim said, where you are intentionally running into somebody to potentially cause harm, then of course that rises to physical misconduct. But if we can't figure out what that intent is, then this is kind of a sticky situation where, you know, your ice etiquette policy, if you have one, would kind of come into play. So, Alan, what's your experience with situations like this?
Same as yours and Tim's, but the piece in this scenario is the encouraging unsafe and aggressive skating. So that would lead me to one of the first things besides live barn is go sit in the rink. You know, go and observe yourself. You're going to want to talk to the parties to get their opinion, but you can learn a lot by just sitting there. And depending on the size of your club and how often you're at the rink, people may not even know you're there. And you can sit ringside, listen in, hear what's going on, and try to get as much information as you can. I mean, you'll hear over and over, you know, getting the facts, getting the information. And in a situation like that, like this one, it's imperative. It might have just been a one-time thing. It might be that Justin and Kyle are competitors, that the parents are very competitive, that the coaches are very competitive, and you just don't know unless you get all the information. We've had these before, and a lot of times after everybody has had their say, it just goes away. The other piece of this that bothers me is that the multiple club members and people have picked a side, and people are talking about it, and it's becoming an uncomfortable place at the rink for the skaters and the parents and the coaches to be around. Shelby, you talked about a coach's code of conduct before, and now, you know, there's a skater's code of conduct you can have, parents' code of conduct, and these are all things If you don't have them, you really should work on them and get them and have them. If you have a situation that is brewing in the club, maybe what you need to do is attack it immediately. Make sure you have a reminder of what the code of conduct is on the ice. And it may just be that younger skaters don't know where the Let's corner is, and they're getting in the way of skaters going into the Let's corner. So, it's all about learning, and it's all about teaching. And if you're having a situation among multiple parents and everybody picking sides, it may be time to have a meeting with the parents, just as a reminder, not to point fingers, not to pick sides, not to say this is why we're having it, but it's more, here's an update. Let's have a refresher. Here's the code of conduct on the ice. And does anybody have any questions? Or is there any way we can improve the code of conduct or improve everybody's time on the ice?
Yeah, and Tim, your comment is exactly what I was about to say. So Alan, you had mentioned showing up and people might not even notice that you're even there just observing. But on the flip side, sometimes just showing up and observing could change those behaviors since people know that you're around. It's going to put them on notice like, hey, Alan's here. Like, we better straighten up today. They know something's going on, correct our behavior. But yeah, exactly right, Tim. It can definitely do the opposite too.
I'm going to chime in here also. Just one thing that I want to make sure everyone's clear on. So when we're talking about SkateSafe and the Safe U.S. Center for Safe Sport, our jurisdiction lies within members of U.S. Figure Skating and Learn to Skate USA. As clubs, and I dropped the code of conduct templates in the chat if you wanted to take a look at them. As a club, you essentially do have jurisdiction over the parents of your skaters. So even if somebody is not a member of US Figure Skating, they might not fall under the jurisdiction of our SkateSafe department, but you can definitely have parents, whether they're members or not, sign that code of conduct. Make sure that they understand the rules and regulations and environment that you're trying to create. And that certainly holds some accountability. If you're having them sign that at the beginning of the season, you're level setting those expectations. And then if something were to arise down the road, you can pull that out and say, look, you signed this. This is what we said our expectations are, and we really want to hold you to that. So, just another vote for those codes of conduct. They are super helpful and beneficial for you if you do ever need to lean on them at some point.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. And same goes with the ice etiquette document. So I know some clubs do have one. Some do not, which has caused some issues because stuff like this, there's no clear policy to address it outside of the intimidation piece, right? So that's something to consider too, is, how many kids are allowed to even be on the ice at the same time during these practice sessions, or what's safe for your specific facility. And your rink management might even have something in place already that kind of covers what all of that should look like. But yeah, the code of conducts are huge. And Julie, thank you for bringing that up, because there have been situations where we've received a report that we would love to address, but the worst thing that we US Figure Skating can do is ban someone's membership. And if they're not a member, it's not a very viable option for some kind of discipline for somebody that did something bad, right? So being able to have that recourse at the local level is huge.
So I'll add a pitch for requiring parents to be members of minor skaters. It's something we talk about, and US Figure Skating cannot require it, but I encourage clubs to require it, because then you have that extra stick if you need it, where you can report somebody to SkateSafe and things like that. What you don't want to happen, and again, if it's an issue going on at the rink and they're non-members, as Alex said, report to the facility. What you don't want to do with situations, and if they get out of control, we've had this happen, rink managers have thrown clubs right out of the rink. They don't want to deal with all the arguments and with all the problems. So that's one of the reasons you jump into this early, get it resolved, and move on, because you don't want it to affect everyone.
Absolutely. Again, I mean, thinking back to the last scenario, I'm kind of feeling a theme here of unresolved issues and how that could just fester and create more problems, especially since this one in particular is more widespread than just Justin and Kyle, right? It's their parents, it's the other club members picking sides, holding people accountable, level setting those expectations, like Julie said, all super important things when you're thinking of how to resolve this specific situation. All right.
One thing I'll add,
yeah.
with this situation, and if, you know, parents around the club are getting the rumor mill going, obviously the best way to address that is to nip it in the butt as fast as possible. But if, you know, the parents, club members, you know, those rumors are going around, it's creating just not the best environment. From the club perspective, just having open and honest communication. You know, if you didn't have a policy in place beforehand, it's not worth trying to like sneak it in or, you know, just implement this policy behind people's back. You know, have an honest conversation about it, and introduce it in an open way, have that discussion with people, and then, you know, moving forward from there, then you do have that policy to reference if there are more rumor mills going.
Definitely. No, that's a really big part, Tim. I mean, you want to make sure that you're continuing to learn as you're dealing with these conflicts. And there might be one that comes up and you're like, oh my goodness, I never thought that this would ever be a thing that we would have to address. And then that makes you have that light bulb moment of, you know, maybe there's something that's missing from our code of conduct, or maybe there's something that's missing from our conflict resolution policy. So the work is never done in reviewing those documents. So don't feel like you missed something if you do have that aha moment, like, oh, geez, we're really missing something. But it's okay. It's all a learning experience. We're all kind of working through this together. Use our templates as a tool to help to fill those gaps before you need to. All right, next scenario here. So you have parents and club board members, Cheryl and Cindy. They have differing personalities and they have had an ongoing conflict for unknown reasons for quite some time. Your board meetings have become unproductive and uncomfortable because Cheryl and Cindy refuse to agree on any matter, and they often start arguments in front of the rest of the board. Cindy accuses Cheryl of sabotaging the club's new initiatives, and Cheryl accuses Cindy of only thinking of her child and operating with ulterior motives. So lots of unproductiveness happening in these board meetings, it sounds like. So Alan, this might be right up your alley.
So probably if I asked everybody to raise their hand if they've ever had a conflict at a board meeting, we would probably see an awful lot of hands go up. It happens. As we say, you can't change personalities. If you have more than one person in a room, in a board meeting, you have the potential of having conflicts. Lots of the parents, or lots of the club board members are parents. They're doing this because of their children, typically. They can get very emotional, and some act differently than others. If you are, in this case, probably more president than the SkateSafe chair, but it could be either. You don't really want to address this in an open board. That's not the place to have this discussion. It's a discussion that should be had outside the boardroom. Don't do it by yourself. Have it with somebody else, maybe the vice president or the SkateSafe chair or the president, whatever the combination. And it's perfectly fine to disagree on every single matter. That has healthy discussion. Board meetings are healthier. You come up with some resolutions you might not have thought of. So that's okay. It's when they become unproductive. So hopefully, if you don't have them now, you can have it in the future. You have board member agreements, which lay out the responsibilities and expectations of each of the board members, and they need to follow them. If they don't follow them, your bylaws will give you opportunities to remove a board member. You never want to do that. You want to try to work it out, but that is something that can be done. You can have a timekeeper. A timekeeper that each person gets 2 minutes to speak, just like we do at governing council. They shut the mic off. You can say, "I'm sorry, your time is up. Let's go on to the next topic." You need to get this one done early. You need to address it. You need to talk to, in this case, Cheryl and Cindy, because first of all, it's hard enough to get board members. It's hard enough to keep board members, and nobody wants to sit around a boardroom and listen to Cheryl and Cindy arguing all the time. If they can't be respectful to one another, they should be asked to leave.
So, Alan, I'm thinking back to my child welfare days, and I would often host meetings with a lot of people that had differing opinions. So, attorneys, families, guardian ad litems, you name it. And we would have like a document that outlined expectations for that specific meeting related to conduct. Is that something that you've ever seen utilized in board meetings or in clubs?
I have not seen it. It's a great idea. I have not seen it. As I said, it happens on, conflict happens between individuals. I was actually in probate court today up here in Maine, and we had to separate the parties in front of the judge and had them speak separately. And to resolve the matter, we had to come up with a third party individual to help be the intermediary between the two. Same thing you do with clubs. And maybe that Cheryl and Cindy have somebody that they both respect and that they will listen to. So your expectations, that's a great idea, Shelby. I haven't seen it at the club level, but there's a whole bunch of tools like that work.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking out loud. I'm sure that you could probably Google like how to run a successful business meeting and then come up with like 50 different ideas for things to avoid, behaviors to kind of nip in the bud, to Tim's point earlier. But yeah, we'll have to think more about that and see if that's something that we want to help out with creating.
I have a question, Alan. I feel like you touched on this maybe just a little bit, and I really wanted to make sure that this was brought up. From the club perspective, right? So the club leaders on this call, the program leaders on this call, what is the recommended number of leaders who are involved in the resolution process? Do you recommend that there is one point person and they are responsible? Do you recommend it's a 3-person panel? Like, how do you think it kind of goes well, from the leadership stand? Who should be the best person? How many people should that be? What do you think kind of looks the best on the leader side, so they know how to necessarily address these issues as they come up?
I mean, Shelby's slide earlier talked about what's a good makeup of somebody to help resolve conflict. I do the same thing, SkateSafe, think 2D. You never want to try to do it on your own. There will be one person, one SkateSafe chair. There may be the conflict resolution policy where it's one person. But when you go in to meet with, especially contentious situations, you want to have a witness. You want to have that second person with you, Julie, so that nobody can point the finger back at Alan saying, well, Alan heard it wrong, or Alan said this. So you want that second person. Sometimes it's hard with clubs. We've had many situations, and Shelby and Tim probably, and Julie, you also, where somebody's pointing the finger at the whole board. And then how do you resolve it? How do you get somebody to come in, step in and do it? Shelby earlier said, have us help, which is, a great idea. I mean, with Shelby, with Tim, with Julie, they contact member services and Susie and myself. There's also times where we recommend that they go to somebody in their community, a mediator or an arbitrator, to step in who can actually go to those meetings. So there's no magic number, Julie, but anything contentious, it's always, in my mind, more than one. I don't like ganging up on people. I don't want the whole board to go and meet with one person. It's counterproductive. They don't really feel like talking. And you really want to get as much information as you can. As Shelby said, if it's ever with a minor, their parents have to be there. There's no parent or guardian. There's no excuse to do it otherwise. So it's kind of a wishy-washy answer for you, Julie, other than to say more than one.
No, and I think that's great too. I think also the example of don't have the whole board, right, involved, right? That can certainly be uncomfortable and intimidating. So I appreciate just, having that little bit of guidance. This doesn't have to be a one-person job. So if you at your club or program are the designated point of contact, please don't feel like you have to solve all the problems by yourself. I appreciate that information, Alan, that definitely multiple people can be involved. And again, lean on US Figure Skating to support however we can as well. Thank you.
And I always try for if the issue is with Tim, and maybe Tim and I haven't had the best relationship, but I know that Kim has a good relationship, and I would ask Kim as the board member to be the lead with me on that discussion, because that would make Tim or whoever the individual is feel more comfortable. Because the idea is to make somebody feel comfortable. You want to have a productive discussion. So if there's a board member that gets along better with the Cheryl or the Cindy in this situation, they're the ones you want to bring in with you.
Yeah, that's great. And I really like what Stephanie shared in the chat too. So they use community agreements or norms for their meetings that would be really helpful. So just to kind of inform you all on what that looks like, it could be something as simple as a list of things like being present, creating space for multiple truths. So again, not discrediting somebody else's feelings in a situation or assuming everyone's best intentions. Noticing power dynamics, sharing gratitude for feedback. So there's a lot of really helpful community norms, if you will. If you just Google that term, you'll find a lot of really good resources that you could, again, just utilize for your board meetings, for your conflict resolution meetings, just to make sure that everybody understands that this is a respectful space, and anything outside of that will not be tolerated.
Yeah, I love those agreed upon norms. And again, this is just where it's really helpful to have a strong conflict resolution policy, because in that policy you can address conflict of interests. And if a conflict of interest does come up where, in this situation, if one of the board members' kids and the two board members don't like each other, having the policy to remove them or just direct it to the right people on the board, those other important players, that's what they're there for. And again, that's why it's not just one person that should be handling these, because conflicts do come up.
And Tim is sharing too that they will do himself plus one other person as the witness for those conversations. So I think that answers your question, Julie. But he brings up a really good point of, when you have too many other people involved, it can be overwhelming. And I'm just thinking like of myself in a situation where if I'm being accused of bad behavior and I have 7 people coming at me with questions, that's going to be so overwhelming. I'm automatically going to go on the defense. And it's just not going to create a productive or I guess productive is the bottom line here. It's not going to be a productive conversation because I am going to be on edge the entire time. I'm probably not going to be totally truthful with you or open with you. So I really like that approach. Thanks, Tim. Tim Murray in the chat, not Tim Hazen on video. And I just want to back up to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Alex Chang, thanks for that comment earlier about, facility suspending a member. I think that's a really good fallback too for those situations where maybe somebody doesn't fall within our jurisdiction to be able to take that kind of action. But it doesn't necessarily mean that a facility can't take action to take somebody who's maybe toxic to the environment out. Or if you have somebody that just generally has no business being present and they're just making other people feel uncomfortable by being there. Always lean on your rink management. So thanks for that reminder, Alex. So we only have a couple of minutes left, and that was my last scenario. So do we have anyone that has any questions, any thoughts, comments, feedback, ideas that they want to share with the group?
I'm going to chime in just with one more comment. And Alan, I know you've said this at some point, and I'm probably stealing it from you. I think just again, as club leaders, as program leaders within your community, you also want to take confidentiality and privacy very seriously. I'm sure you've probably been at, in the club and at the rink, and you hear gossip and you hear rumors, and it's just so easy for people to fall into that. parking lot chit chat. And definitely if you are involved in a situation with folks at your club and you're really trying, you know, to minimize the problem, you definitely want to be mindful of that. So don't be in the room, have a conversation, and then you yourself, you know, go out to the parking lot and continue that conversation. I know I'm stealing this from you, Alan, but I just feel like it's a really good reminder for folks to take this seriously and be respectful of and mindful of the people who are in the situation. You know, whatever the extent it is, of course, we're talking, you know, someone else is in immediate danger, right? Like that's a different situation. But if we're just talking, you know, maybe just a typical daily, you know, type of conflict, I think it's really important to keep that in mind as well.
Definitely. So Julie, if you could just stop our recording, please.